Hello everyone, welcome to your next module all about trauma. And I'm sure you're wondering why this module is part of your level 4 program. So trauma actually has a big effect on children's development. So it is important for you to understand the effects of trauma and how that impacts children, because ultimately it impacts their development and then as a result your work with them. So I'm going to take you through a few of the important elements in the start of this module before we get into the more detailed and complicated processes. So first of all, what is trauma? Trauma is any event that is causing us stress or anxiety, anything that makes us feel safe. It's usually something that makes us feel helpless, that changes your way of thinking about the world. It gives you false ideas of what the world is about yourself. Okay, so trauma, an event that happens, makes you feel helpless or stressed or anxious. So there's three parts to trauma. First of all, the thing that happens or the event or the experience is unexpected. In other words, you didn't know, or the person didn't know that it's going to happen. You couldn't plan for it is the next thing. So in other words, not being able to plan for it, you didn't know it was going to happen. It's not something, and the third thing is, it's not something that you could have prevented or stopped from happening. Okay, so if we take, for example, a car accident, you didn't plan that car accident to happen. You didn't know the car accident was going to happen, and there was nothing that you could do to stop it from happening. Okay, so there's three important parts of trauma. Okay, so trauma can also be something that happens once. It can be something that happens on a regular basis, on an ongoing basis. It could also be something that you witnessed that happened. So it can also be something that you heard from someone else, or someone told you about a traumatic event that happened. Okay, it can also be something that is threatening to happen. Okay, so which is actually not happening, but there's a possibility of it happening. Okay, so we all react differently to trauma. Okay, so some of us might react differently to exactly the same situation. There's a lot of things that impact how we react. So first of all, your history, how you grew up, your support system, the way that you cope with things, how you've been taught how to deal with stressful situations. So there's a lot of things that has an impact of how we respond to trauma. So not all of us are the same. Not all of us will react the same to trauma. So with trauma, there's also the idea that when something happens, it is stressful and we are going to go through a lot of processes. But ideally, we want the person to be able to continue with life as normal, as before. Okay, so there's a lot of processes and things like that that needs to happen to help the person. But what happens if a person doesn't return back to normal functioning? That's where a person develops something called post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm sure you've all heard about that. So post-traumatic stress disorder happens when a person is getting stuck in certain stages and they're not moving forward, they're not adapting back to life. Okay, so post-traumatic stress happens in three phases. The first phase is the impact phase. The second one is the recoil, and then there's the reorganization phase. So in the impact phase, and you can read in your notes, it usually happens a few days after the incident, where you feel very anxious, stressed, and you're feeling like you're in constant danger. Then you move on to the recoil phase, where in the next 2 to 4 weeks you still feel some of the symptoms, you still feel a little anxious and stressed, but then you slowly start getting back into your routines and returning back to normal functioning of life. Then there's the reorganization phase, where the symptoms and the feelings start to subside and a person is able to return back to normal life. But then when a person gets stuck between phases 1 and 2 and they keep getting stuck there, they're not moving on to the reorganization phase for about 4 to 6 weeks, we can say that a person has probably developed post-traumatic stress disorder. And also remember that we are not the specialists in this. I'm just giving you the information so that we can start identifying the symptoms and then helping a child or a family move forward. So the next thing I want to talk to you about it is that sometimes children, we think that they're too young to experience trauma. But remember, children's brains are like sponges. They keep taking in as much information, and especially sensory information, in their environment. So I will also send a video shortly that you can look at, that will explain a little bit more on how children is impacted in trauma when trauma happens. So remember that children don't have the vocabulary or the experience yet to be able to tell us how they feel or talk about what had happened. So children are also able to experience post trauma stress. So there's different things that children can experience as stressful. For example, losing a loved one, losing a pet, being placed in foster care, car accidents, different forms of abuse, neglect. There's natural disasters like a flood or losing their home in gale force winds or things like that. There's also bullying that can cause trauma. There's violence in the home. So domestic violence, being in the presence of where domestic violence is taking place, or there's also substance abuse in the home, divorced parents. There's so many things that children can experience as trauma. Remember that when they are in that situation, they might not necessarily express or show any signs or symptoms of trauma afterwards. But sometimes weeks or even months or even years later, you will see that the children will start expressing certain behaviors where they are experiencing post-traumatic stress. And as I said earlier, we need to support these children, and later on in the module we'll get to all of that details on how to support children, how to support families, and ultimately these children and their parents who had experienced trauma need to be referred to specialists. I hope this was helpful.